And here we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of the Britt Kanawha West Hancock podcast. I'm Dan Kroll. Welcome back. This is, like I said, episode 2. On January the 13th, I did episode 1. I sat down on Zoom with Kevin Sanger, the oldest of the Sanger boys. We talked about his parents. We talked about West Hancock and Britt athletics. As of this recording, that episode 1 had over 400 views. So thank you all very much for tuning in and watching it. I was very blown away by the response. Kevin claimed he didn't watch it more than a couple times to boost the numbers, so we're good there. It just shows that Britt Kanawha communities are pretty awesome places to call home. Today, as you can see, I have a different guest, and that would be Steve Everett II. Welcome, Steve.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I'm really excited about this episode, guys. Kevin Sanger, I know very well, and I created the record book for the Sanger era, so I knew a lot of stuff. This episode, I got to do a lot of digging and a lot of searching, doing some research. That's right up my alley, so I'm excited to talk to Steve here in a few minutes. Like I did last episode, I want to kind of keep you guys up to date on West Hancock events. As you all know, most events are live streamed on KIOW.com for free, and they do a great job of putting those events on the internet for you, especially with COVID going on. Tomorrow night, the 29th, the JV varsity girls and boys basketball teams are at home against Forest City starting at 4. Monday, the 1st, middle school girls basketball is home against Newman. JV varsity girls basketball and boys basketball is at Clary and Goldfield Dows that night as well. Tuesday, the 2nd, JV varsity girls and boys basketball is at Belmont starting at 4. And the wrestling team, led by Coach Mark Sanger, of course, has a quad at South Hamilton. On Thursday, February 4th, middle school girls basketball goes to Garrigan. The middle school wrestling team goes to Eagle Grove. And then Friday, the 5th, JV varsity girls boys basketball is at Garrigan for a big conference matchup. Steve, I'm guessing a few of those schools sounded maybe a little confusing to you. There's been a lot of consolidation and changes and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at Britt, it was Britt. and then there was Kanawha and there was Corinth Wesley and so on. So yeah,
there's been a lot of changes you'll see here in the recaps. Boys basketball, we'll start there with Coach Hiscock's team. They're 8-9 so far this year. They lost since the last podcast on the 13th. They've lost to Mason City. They lost to Garner Hayfield Ventura. They beat North Union, beat Manson Northwest Webster. I got to actually watch the North Union game. They did very well that night. They beat Eagle Grove this past Monday, and they beat North Iowa Buffalo Center on Tuesday. I also watched that game because my brother's an assistant coach up at North Iowa. Boys district assignments for the basketball, for boys basketball came out this week. Our district includes Garrigan, GTRA, Lake Mills, Newman, North Iowa, North Union, St. Ed's, and West Bend Mallard. Lake Mills is the favorite in that district. Hopefully we can pull off an upset. The winner of that district goes to District 4 for Sub-State, and that's mostly top of Iowa East teams. And Steve, if you're unaware, the North Iowa Conference is no longer the North Iowa Conference. We joined with the Corn Bowl Conference, and it's an 18-team super conference. And so there's a lot of different teams.
No, I did not know that.
Consider a conference school. So very, very different looking than what you'd be used to. The girls basketball team, Coach Sonius, they're 15-2, ranked number 9 in Class 2A. Since the last podcast, they beat Hampton Dumont Cal. They lost to Garner Hayfield Ventura. They beat North Union and Manson. And then on Monday, they also beat Eagle Grove and beat North Iowa girls on Tuesday. I just wanted to point out Rick Meyer is the coach for North Iowa, a good friend of mine and great guy. He's going to turn that program around, I hope. So I'm really excited to see how he does in the future years. The girls are second in the conference, only behind Garrigan. Garrigan's probably going to win 1A state this year, so no shame in being behind them. Regionals come out next week for the girls. They play their regional games the 13th, 16th, 19th, and 24th of February. Rachel Lear was injured a week or so ago, our star player, and she's hopefully going to be back for playoffs. That'll be helpful. Wrestling team real quick here, and then Steve will be ready to rock and roll. And when you were in school, wrestling was big, and it's kind of fun to see that wrestling's coming back. Mark Sanger, Coach Sanger's youngest, has really done a great job of turning that around. They, at the conference meet, were 3rd out of 16 teams. Not all teams have wrestling. Third place, there were only dozen 20 points behind second place. At 113, Luis Sandoval was seventh. Freshman Kellen Smith was the runner-up at 120. 138 pounds, Matt Larson was fourth. 145, Jake Wood was sixth. Kane Zool at 152 was the conference runner-up. He also recorded his 100th career win this last week. Briar Subject at 160 was the runner-up as well. Justin Osborne was fourth at 170. Kale Zool was fourth at 182. He's also a freshman. And at 195 and 220, we had two conference champions in Matthew Francis and Cole Kelly. And Justin Osborne, I forgot to mention, also picked up his 100th win. And Mark Sanger was the conference coach of the year this year. And then one more note before I plug the Sanger Legacy Fund, they recently announced that they're going to add a 7th class to the football playoffs in Iowa. In the past, we had 4A, 3A, 2A, 1AA, and then 8-man. They're adding a 5A class for the largest city schools to kind of separate out some of those West Des Moines Valley schools and some of the smaller but still big city schools. There's going to have 36 teams in those top 3 classes. 2A and 1A will have 48, and then Class A is where West Hancock plays. They're going to have about 60 teams. It's whoever's left. 8-man's going to remain one division for now. It's not going to change a whole lot for us. A couple of the bigger Class A schools will probably bump up to 1A, and that's about it. So, and we're going to talk, Stephen, a little bit. When you played, your dad had some great teams, but there was no playoffs back then. So we want to talk a little bit with you about. That'd be really cool to talk about. If there were playoffs, how would Britt have done in those couple years that they were really good? So we'll get to that here in a minute. Real quick here, though, the Sanger Legacy Fund was created to honor the late, great Coach Bob Sanger and his wife and former teacher, Mrs. Linda Sanger. They both taught and coached at Britt and West Hancock for over 50 years and impacted thousands of lives. The Legacy Fund raises money to help the communities of Britt and Kanawha, and more specifically West Hancock schools and their athletic programs and events and activities. Please consider giving or continuing to give to the Sanger Legacy Fund. You can go to sangerstrong.com to donate. Again, that's sangerstrong.com. And one thing I wanted to mention to people is a week from today is the 1-year anniversary of Coach Sanger passing away, February 5th. That was a tough time for everyone, especially the Sanger family. So just keep the Sanger family in your thoughts and prayers as they approach that time next week. So like I said, here we go. Steve Everett II joins me today for the podcast, episode 2. Like I said, Steve is the son of the late great Coach Steve Everett. Coach Everett coached football at Britt from 1955 until 1962. And then, like you told me in the email, he stayed there until kind of the early 70s, you thought. So thanks again for joining me, Steve.
I'm glad to be here. This is going to be something new for me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, I found out about your dad when I was doing the record book. I don't know if you heard, but when Coach passed away, I was kind of the stat guy for our school just as a hobby, and it turned into a record book. Someone said, you should make a record book out of Coach's 52 years. I did that, and it ended up raising almost $11,000 for the Legacy Fund. And I met a relative of yours, Kelly Ekoff. She still lives in Britt. And she mentioned, do you know my grandpa or great grandpa? And I said, no, I don't. She goes, he was one of the coaches before Coach Sanger, and he was really good. So that got me interested, and she got me in contact with you. And like I said earlier, I'm pretty excited to do this podcast because I've learned quite a bit. So
well, there's an awful lot of people who played under my dad who are no longer here. I mean, I'm not exactly a kid, right? I'm 72. Wait a minute, what year is this? Yeah, I'm still 72. I'll be 73 in 2 weeks.
Awesome. Should have waited 2 weeks, done it right on your birthday. That would have been fun. Yeah. So a little bit of background I found out about your dad. I'm sure you all know this, or you know this, Steve, but I want to let everyone who's going to watch this know. And if I'm wrong on any of this, let me know. I pulled it from the old Britt News Tribune articles that I found online. Your dad went to Fayette High School. He was a three-sport standout. Went to college, but not to be a teacher. After college, he sold sporting goods, operated a filling station, and worked in a factory, and then decided to get his teaching degree. And when I found out where his first teaching job was, I was pretty excited. I don't know if you know the Ed Thomas story, but your dad's first job was at Parkersburg High School. back in, was it 1942, I think is what I have down in my notes, if that sounds right.
I was thinking it was Colfax, but Colfax may have come after that.
Yeah, he didn't coach football at Parkersburg, so I think maybe that's where, yeah. And I wanted to plug real quick the Ed Thomas book. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's called The Sacred Acre. He was a coach here in Iowa, small school like Britt. He was helped them rebuild after a tornado wiped out most of their town. And then the next year he was murdered by one of his former players. And it was just a really crazy story. And he was a really great guy, kind of Coach Sanger like. So a lot of people connected those two together. And so I thought that was kind of neat that your dad started at Parkersburg. 1943, he went to Colfax, like you were saying, and that's where he ran his first football team. What I researched, that they only lost 3 games in 2 seasons. In 45, he went to Pocahontas. Again, they only lost 3 games in 2 seasons. I think they tied a game as well. In 1947, he went to Albert City and coached there for 3 years, had 1 undefeated season, and he had a guy play at Iowa State and a player go to Iowa to play football. And then from 50 to 54, he was at Ida Grove. I didn't really find much about how he did there, but based on his overall coaching record, I think he had a winning record. And then 55, he came to Britt. So what do you remember? Do you remember moving to Britt at all, or any of those prior stops?
Well, I am going to make one correction since you offer. He went to college to be a teacher.
Did he? Okay.
But then he and mom got married and they had a baby right away. And he said, I can't make a living. She couldn't work. And especially at that time, they had lots of rules. So he did whatever he could to put food on the table. And then World War II broke out. Turned out he was 4F. And now all of a sudden there was a shortage of men teachers, and they raised the pay, and he had to learn how to be a coach.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. The article I read didn't say anything about what he went to college for. I just assumed maybe he went back and changed careers or something. So that's cool.
Well, and that's the thing, I only know that because I heard the story many times, and that's the only reason I know it.
Yep.
So anyway, we moved to Britt when I was 7, and there were 2 primary reasons why they did that. Back in that day, a lot of times school districts had rules where a husband and wife could not work together in the same district. I know that sounds weird, but that's the way it was. Yeah. But the thing that started him looking to move, because he did pretty well in Ida Grove, and my 2 oldest sisters graduated from there. But he wanted to find a town where if I wanted to play sports, I could, because Ida Grove School was probably at least twice as big as Britt, and it was the smallest school in that conference, as I recall. I might be wrong. So anyway, that he moved there. My mom taught 5th grade forever, and my dad stayed there for the rest of his teaching and coaching career.
Cool. Do you know what Ida Grove School is what their school is called now?
I have no clue.
With all the consolidation, it's now Battle Creek, Ida Grove, Odie Boat, Arthur. And they've now won the last 2 state championships in 2A and 1A. They have a kid going to play at Iowa. So like I said, Iowa has had a lot of consolidation, a lot of mergers. So it's not just Ida Grove anymore. And it's been that way for a while. So you were pretty young when you got to Britt. So you probably, have not a lot of memories, but one thing I found was when your dad took over the football program, they were on an 11-game losing streak. The couple years prior to that, they 52, they were 3-5. In 1953, they were 3-5, and then in 54, the year before he got there, they were 0-8, and like I said, an 11-game losing streak. And one thing I thought was very interesting about your dad taking over the program at Britt was his first 3 seasons weren't that good either. And when Coach Sanger took over in 68, his first several seasons weren't very good. And then obviously your dad had a ton of success. Coach Sanger had a ton of success in the future years. One thing that really bugs me in sports these days is a coach gets like 2 years, and if they don't have instant success, they're gone. They just, move on to the next guy. And it's like, you got to give people time to get their program set up, or you never know what they're going to be capable of.
Right. And that's when you're coming into a losing program, uh, you have to change the attitude of the athletes too. That's
Yep.
not just the community or whatever, the athletes. And if they've got a losing mentality in their head, it can take a while. Just
Yep.
like if they have a winning mentality, they can do better than maybe they should, just because of that.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, like I was looking, your dad's first 3 years, 2-6, they were 1-7, and then 1-5. And what I found out in my research was the last two games of that season, which would have been 1957, there was a flu outbreak. School was canceled for a couple weeks, and many games in the area got canceled because most of the school was out with the flu. Do you remember that flu outbreak at all? Especially since
Nope,
we're talking about a
I
pandemic.
certainly don't.
Yep, thought that was kind of neat, especially since we're talking about it in the middle of
That
a.
would have been about fifth or sixth grade at the time, I guess.
Yep. School was canceled. They let everybody out, and they said most of the players and had the flu, and only got a couple 6 games in that year. So, but then uh, after that season, your dad's teams went on a streak of 5 straight conference titles. You would have played on let me see, 62 team was your freshman year, right? Because you played
Yeah,
62.
yeah, I have to stop. I have to stop and literally count
Yep.
because I graduated in 66, so 65 would have been my senior year. Yeah,
Yep.
that's right.
62 was your freshman year, and that was your dad's last year as the coach.
Right.
I have my notes here from the record book. I didn't let you know, but the Sanger record book I made, that's about 170 pages long. I'm now including prior seasons, and I'm working on 1964 right now. I'm working myself backwards from 67, 66, 65, 64. So I sent you that picture and that part of the article the other day to show you what I've been researching. But after that 57 shortened season where the flu outbreak happened, your dad's teams went 5-1-2 in 58. In 1959, they were 7-1. In 1960, they were 8-0. In 61, they were 7-1. And then your freshman year, your dad's last year's coach, they were 7-0 and with one tie. And that tie was to Osage in the last game of the year. So I mean, they went on quite a streak.
Not only the last game, but the last play of the last game, they scored a touchdown to tie.
Yeah. Yep. I saw that in the article. That's crazy. Just seconds away from a perfect season. So what do you remember about playing for your dad that freshman year? Do you remember much about that freshman year?
Well, a little bit. I mean, it gets a little bit foggy because I really didn't play as a freshman. I mean, I was there on the team, but I didn't play.
Yeah.
But I was involved in practice, and a couple years before that, I had the opportunity to be there and to watch, but it's different. And his coaching style was quite different from most coaches. He kept things simple. He didn't try to go out and invent an offense or invent plays, really. He kept things simple. You learn how to do something, and you do it well, and you make the other team stop you.
Yep.
And that's the way he coached. And he focused on fundamentals. Even, senior kids still focused on fundamentals, blocking, tackling, knowing the plays, played T formation, as I recall, all the way through, didn't experiment with any of the other things that were out there. And it's like, you learn how to do the fundamentals, you do it, and you're going to be in good shape. Yep. And that's kind of the way he looked at it.
Yeah, and it's cool to hear that because that's exactly what we got in the Sanger years was simple fundamental football. So it's just cool to see, even with different coaches, it stayed the same, and it drives me nuts watching some football nowadays where people think if you pass it 50 times a game and have all these trick plays that's what's going to work. And then Britt and then Wes Hancock, for years it's just been simple. Do your job, do it well, do it right, and you don't have to be fancy. And I love it. Like, I just can't get enough of that type of football. You don't see it much anymore.
People feel like they have to be too creative, too complicated. And that's really tough in high school, unless you got a really big school with a bunch of top-notch athletes. But it's like, I remember one time, and I'm going to make up the number, but I was like in junior high, and I would be like a water boy. I'd be on the sidelines, and he ran the same play something like 15 times in a row.
Yep.
Off tackle right, off tackle left, 15 times in a row. And somebody criticized him for it. And he says, they couldn't stop it. So why would I need to change?
Yep. Yep. Exactly. That's my brand of football right there. You said he ran the T, like the wing T or a straight T.
My recollection was it was pretty much of a straight T.
Yeah.
I think he might have done some wing T stuff, but most of it, again, my recollection is it was mostly straight T.
Yep. Tell me that story you emailed me. I asked you to think of some good stories about your dad. The one about halftime. I love that when I was reading that. The one that.
Well, and I was, I'm not sure exactly which year, but it was one of those years when they really good. So it was like 60, 61. And I would be guy going to the locker room with everybody. And we were playing a team that was not very good. And Britt was just supposed to mop up on the whole conference. And they were behind at halftime, as I recall. And all the guys came in the locker room, and I came in with them because that's what I always did. And I sat down, and we were waiting for Dad. And he waited intentionally a few minutes and just let everybody sit there.
Yeah.
And he came in, and he looked around. I can still hear the words in my head. He said one thing: you guys are better than this. And he walked in his office and shut the door. And everybody sat there, and then pretty soon the team leaders started talking, okay, look, he's right. We need to do this. We need to do that. And they went up and went out the second half and just cleaned the clock.
Like you said earlier, simple. I mean, just he knows what's effective. You know it's going to work, and you stick with it.
And he may have sometime, but I never heard him truly raise his voice to anyone.
Yeah.
And the closest he came was when I was out there as a freshman, and it was a really cold day, and I was trying to wear my stocking cap under my helmet. And he comes over there, he says, "What is that?" And I kind of startled. He said, "Take that damn thing off." And that's the closest I ever heard him come to
anything. Yeah. Yep. What was he like as a teacher? I don't even know what he taught. Was it social studies?
No, he taught math.
Math. Okay.
And basically at that time, he was hired as a football coach. That was his primary thing. And he would teach whatever they needed. And his way of teaching was just like his way of coaching. Keep it simple, make people understand. And so he taught junior high math. Yep. And somewhere along the line after I graduated, I think he switched because they brought somebody in for some job. And so at that time, he was primarily study hall and athletic director.
Yep. And he stayed on
his last couple of years.
He stayed on as AD after he gave up football for quite a while, right?
Yes, he did. And that was, it wasn't a ceremonial position, but he got to the point for a number of reasons where he couldn't actively coach anymore.
Yeah. Was it something about a bad back that kind of prevented him from doing some stuff?
Yeah. And that probably partly went back to one of the reasons he was 4F in World War II, but just over time, playing golf and playing sports and stuff like that, his back got really bad and he didn't want to have surgery.
Yep.
And it got to the point in my senior year where it was very difficult for him to stand for the entire basketball game, which is the way he did it. So at Christmas time, as I recall, he retired and Cliff took over for the rest of the season.
Yeah. And you said Cliff Woodford, he was one of the assistants, right? Who were the other assistants, or was he the only one?
Well, he's the only one I remember. I mean, it wasn't a big staff, and there was probably others there. But when I get my age of remembrance, in junior high and high school, he was the assistant coach.
Okay.
Yeah. And he Dad felt he did a really good job. And so when he got ready to retire, and the second time when he got ready to retire, he just recommended Cliff for the job.
Yeah, and Cliff was hovered around the 500 mark his couple years as coach. So I mean, he was respectable. And there was, I think, a pretty big wave of talent that left after your senior year. So I think they were kind of young and inexperienced, is what I kind of saw in my research those couple years. So,
Yeah.
When you were in school, was the school was it the elementary school, the old 2-story brick building with the pool, or were you guys across town?
They built the high school, what became the high school on the west end of town. Trying to remember exactly when, but somewhere around my junior high area.
Okay.
And our house was 518 Center Street.
Okay.
And so it was a little over a mile to school. And when I started getting involved in track, when track season came, I would run to school, and Dad would take my clothes out there, and I'd take a shower and get ready for class.
Nice. Yep. Yeah, the school now, I don't know if you know this, or the high school where you went on the west side of town, the elementary school is actually connected to the high school. They built that in about 2004, 2005, about when I was graduating high school. So that's connected. And then the middle school's in Kanawha. We are merged with them.
What did they do with the 2-story school? I forgot now.
It sat there empty for, I don't know, someone can help me correct on this, but 5 or 6 years, something like that. They tore it down, and now that's where the swimming pool is. They had in the last, 10 years, built a very nice, respectable aquatic center. Very nice pool. And if you don't know this, actually, I don't think I even told you, I don't even live in Britt anymore. I live in Indianola, which is south of Des Moines. So I try to get up to games once in a while, but I try my best to keep up on things. So I lose track of dates and time as well. And by the way, Steve, do you want to tell people where you're doing this podcast from right now?
I'm doing it from Fort Collins, Colorado. I moved to Colorado in 1980. I became a stockbroker with A.G. Edwards, and then about 7 years later, I left and went with an independent firm. And so I've been a financial advisor for 30 some odd years after I left A.G. Edwards. And, it's just like back in Iowa, things have changed a lot here. The difference is it's gotten a whole lot bigger. So many people and companies and so on have come to the Front Range of Colorado. I mean, it's one of the comments that I have made over the years is Britt was an absolutely wonderful place to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
The town was friendly. It was small. We still had Doc. I can't think of his name now. Kept the movie theater open because he wanted to have people have a place to go.
Yeah.
People would go to the sports games, and at that time, Hobo Day was a huge event. People would come from all over northern Iowa and southern Minnesota. There'd be thousands of people there for the parade and so on. It was a nice place to grow up. But, I was 6 blocks from the theater. I'd walk home in dark, after going to a movie, and nobody worried about it.
Yep.
We couldn't even lock our doors until an event happened with my niece, and my dad felt he needed to put locks on the doors because some stuff went missing.
Yep.
So, it was really nice. And, when I decided, I got out of the Army and went to graduate school, and I almost went to medical school, and I was a teaching assistant in graduate school. And I said, I really like this. Mm-hmm. My mom and dad had tried to talk me out of going into teaching. And so I decided I was too poor I was tired of being poor. I didn't want to go to medical school and suffer for all that poverty for another 6 years.
Yeah.
So I came up to Iowa and taught and was assistant coach in several sports.
Yeah. Did you say it was Clarion is where you taught and coached for a while?
That's my last 2 years. I went to a small school, and boy, my mind just went blank, over by about 30 miles east of Sioux City. And I had to kind of relearn how high school kids thought.
Yeah.
And so I did 1 year there, and I went to Clarion, and I taught nothing but chemistry and physics. They had chemistry, advanced chemistry and physics, and that's all I taught. And it was really nice because the only kids that were there were those that had wanted to be there. And I got to be assistant coach, so I could be involved, but I didn't have all the responsibility of being a head coach.
Yep. Yep, definitely. So you were telling me how much the Britt community was great for you growing up.
Right.
Describe to everybody when your football games. I mean, did you have big crowds, supportive crowds? The community was pretty fired up.
My recollection is yes, and when I was younger, I'd be up in the stands. There'd be all kinds of people up there. When you're, fifth, sixth grade, it seems like thousands. Of course, it wasn't, but then as I got older, and I started playing, you kind of lose track of that, but you always know that there's a lot of people there. There were so many things that you could do, and so many people, only so many things. And people had grown up and they'd gone to school there, and they wanted to, go and watch wrestling, in particular, and football.
Yeah, wrestling was especially big when you're in school. They won state in 60
Really
and
did.
61 or 61 and 62, I think.
I know they did very well, and kids are attracted to the sports that are really successful.
Yeah.
So a lot of the good athletes became wrestlers instead of basketball players.
Yeah.
We had a kind of an okay team like my senior year. We only won 6 or 7 games, but nobody really wiped us out in my recollection.
Yeah.
And
Competitive.
Larry was conference scoring champion, but nobody on the team was over 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Nobody. So when I had to guard a center for Osage in one game, and he's like 6'3", 6'4", and I'm 5'9", and how am I going to do this? I can't let him get the ball.
Yeah.
And before people fronted, and I started fronting him, and he'd never had that happen, and they couldn't adjust. So actually, it did pretty well, but they still beat us.
Yeah. You just described my basketball career. I'm a 6-foot center, and I had 6'6" kids every night, and we'd win 8 to 10 games a year. So basketball was pretty much that way at Britt for decades. And then actually 2015, 16, and 17, the boys team went to state all 3 years and won one of the games. The girls team's been to state the last 2 years and a couple years in the 2010, 2011, been to a championship game. But for years it was wrestling.
Have girls sports when I was there.
Yep.
When my dad moved from Idaho, my number 3 sister was a senior at Britt, and they had no girls athletics at all. And so she couldn't play.
Yeah, times have changed, but our girls' sports are pretty strong right now. With wrestling and being there when you were there, did you know Coach De Leon, Al De Leon?
Oh yeah, Al came just like right around when I was in 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade, and he taught junior high Spanish. I did Spanish for 3 years, and unfortunately, he focused on having us learn how to read. And it's too bad he didn't have us focused on learning how to speak, because in today's world, that would be really helpful.
Yep. Yeah, he was a nice guy. I never had him as a teacher. 2020 was a rough year for Britt, losing Coach De Leon and Coach Sanger all in the same year. But they had some great people in our community, some great coaches. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but with your dad's coaching, how do you handle success? He was the 1962 Des Moines Register's Coach of the Year. How do you handle that? How do you handle the criticism if they lost the game? Was he one of those guys that couldn't handle losing, or was he pretty good at taking a loss?
I think on the last part of the question. He was pretty good at taking a loss. You would have a hard time telling an hour after the game what had happened, whether they won or whether they lost. He handled success very well. And there were two reasons why he got Coach of the Year. Number one, when that last year that he coached, they lost almost a whole team, all the starters. And so they were picked by the Mason City paper to get like 6th or 7th or something like that. And Osage tied the game in the last play. And so there was a lot of unexpected success. But the big reason is, in my opinion, my dad was extremely well liked by his competitors, by coaches that he'd known, by towns where he grew up, and newspapers, and so on and so forth. And I believe that is more important because there are always a lot of good coaches, right? Yeah. But he handled success very well. He handled criticism. He didn't get a lot of it, but you always get some as a coach. I don't care how well you're doing. And I think I mentioned when he ran the same play like 15 times in a row, somebody said, well, why do you keep running? Well, because they couldn't stop it. Okay. To him, it's like, that's a silly question.
Yep.
But one of the things that I shared, one of the strong memories I have was I was probably around 9th grade. And one of the parents came over after a basketball game, and I won't use the first name because there's people out there who know exactly who I'm talking about, even though he's no longer alive. But he knocked at the door, and I opened the door, and he said, "Is your dad here?" I said, "Well, yes, come on in." And I went and got Dad. Well, I kind of got trapped in the living room, and this gentleman just erupted. He was so angry because his son had been a starter for 2 years and he didn't play much that game. And he just ranted and raved. And my dad sat there and listened. And when he was done, he very calmly explained why he didn't play very much, because he didn't match up against this other team on defense. And so that was important. And he never got upset.
Yeah.
And so the parent ended up sincerely apologizing and leaving. And that was a real eye-opening experience for me as a young.
Yeah. Just like anything, it's how you respond to something can completely change the conversation.
That's right. And most of the time, I'm not as good as my dad in a whole bunch of arenas. He was an extremely good people person. He just he maintained friends. Every time he moved, he always kept some friends from wherever he was, and he was very good at keeping in touch with people. And I'm not. So, I learned a lot of good things from him. But when you have different personalities, it can be a little bit tough to emulate everything that you'd like to.
Yep. And man, you throw athletic director with football coach, and he did basketball and everything else. It's a big job. I can't imagine some of the stuff thrown his way, and I'm sure he handled it pretty well.
Yeah, I think he did. And back again, Britt was a small school. They didn't have girls sports. They didn't have a golf team because no golf course. We drove 18 miles to play golf.
Yep.
When I was 8. But it was, other than that, it was a nice thing. And having sports where you can not have the most ability in the world and still do well, like track, was very good for my self-esteem.
Yep. The Britt golf course, you said, got built while you were living in Britt, right?
I believe it was built my senior year. Now, I might be wrong on that, but it was right around that time. Yes, it was. But I knew one other kid who played golf.
Yep.
In the whole town. So
yeah, and some of the articles I read, I couldn't remember what year, but there was articles about it getting built and saying we need funding to help get the course built, and it was a pretty big deal at the time to to add to the city.
Prior to that, year or two prior to that, a couple of farmers built a golf course between Britt and Wesley.
Okay.
And I don't even know if it's still there or not, but
Yeah, Hillside.
okay. And so then instead of driving to Forest City 18 miles, we could drive 4 or 5 miles out to Hillside. And then they built the course in Britt, and I'd been playing enough that I was actually able to play on the golf team at Luther my last 3 years.
Okay.
Nice. I mean, I was never the number one golfer, but I was on the team, which is nice.
Yep. So I'm a Central College grad. That doesn't offend you at all, being a Luther guy, does it? We're good?
Nope.
Yeah.
not at all.
Yeah. Brings back a few bad memories from my senior year of football, but I'll get past that. One thing I found about your dad, he gave up football after the 1962 season. He was the Des Moines Register Coach of the Year. And I'm like, why the heck would he quit? And you said with back issues. And then you also told me something interesting about another reason why he gave it up. I just thought it was cool that the school board tried begging him to not resign. Like they pleaded with him, like, please keep coaching. Because like I said, 5 straight conference titles. They want to keep that thing going. So can you tell everyone, one thing you were telling me about one reason why he gave it up?
The primary reason why he gave it up was for me. He felt my dad was extraordinarily fair, sometimes fair to the point of being unfair. But it's like when he knew that I had X amount of ability, and there would be other people on the team that might have the same amount of ability as me or more at a particular position. And then in his mind, to be fair, they would have to be nudged ahead of me. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean I wouldn't play, but it's like I was going to be quarterback and my junior year, and I dislocated my thumb. This is for Woodford. And so I had to switch to halfback and defensive halfback. And I never got the job back, but he felt that I would be better off playing if somebody else was coach.
Yep.
And that's one of the same reasons why he moved to Britt, was to go to a smaller school to give me the opportunity, if I wanted to do sports, to do it. Yep. He never pushed me, but it's just, I always loved sports. I always did.
Did he have any offers to coach elsewhere after he gave up at Britt? Were other schools trying to poach him over at all?
I don't know. I never really thought about that, but he may have.
Yeah.
But there was he wasn't gonna, at that station in life, he was not gonna move. He retired 8 years after I graduated.
So what did we say? No, was that 1974 we thought then?
I believe it was 74 that mom and dad retired. Yeah.
Yep. So I didn't realize, I had thought the whole time, because I didn't see a whole lot in the Britt paper about this, but I thought he left after 62. So the fact that he taught with the Sangers and Jim Timmerman and Bob Grangenet and Denny Brumm and all those people, that got me really excited thinking about a lot of my teachers taught with your dad. I thought that was pretty neat. What are some teachers and stuff you recall from your days?
Well, I should have gotten my yearbook out and looked everything up. There were a couple that 3 that kind of stuck in my mind. I'm not gonna say her name right. Irma Shody.
Okay.
And it's probably something nobody else will ever mention, but she taught math. She taught high school math, and she was extremely smart. The problem was she didn't really understand why us kids didn't understand something.
Yeah. And
she and I got along pretty well because I was in many times just as lost as the other kids in geometry, but I could ask intelligent enough questions that she didn't get annoyed.
Yeah. The right amount.
I would ask questions, but I didn't get annoyed. And then Al De Leon and Bob Grangenet. I think he came just before my junior year, I believe. or
Okay.
maybe at my junior year.
And he retired after my junior year, 2003, 2004.
Now, what was he teaching at that time?
Science
Yeah,
still.
still
Yep.
chemistry and physics.
Yep. He had some health problems right towards the end, and then he passed away 2, 3 years after he retired when I was in college. I'm not a science guy. I hated it. And he made me learn science. He was that type of guy. Was like, you're going to do it. And that's what I
And on
really
the other hand, when
appreciated.
he came to Britt, he brought in, I think he maybe came when I was maybe a sophomore, I'm not sure. But there was a new chemistry program out that was, instead of just being the hard, cold textbook.
Yep.
I can't remember what it was called, but you got the kids involved and didn't worry so much about memorizing details. And I thought, this is really great. So after my junior year, I went to a summer science institute in chemistry at St. Olaf College.
Okay.
And my friend said, what are you going to school in the summer for? And the thing that I've got to say this right. The thing that benefited me the most is I saw that really smart kids could be normal.
Yeah.
And Britt was a small school, and all of them at the Science Institute were incredibly bright, made me feel sometimes a little lower than them. But they were also athletes and musicians and so on. And my experience was with my competition for valedictorian didn't do anything except go to class.
Yep.
And I found out that was not typical of people at the top of their class.
Cool. Was Jim Pauls a teacher of yours, or was he there at that time? Does that name sound familiar?
I believe so. But I don't remember having him for class.
Okay. He retired also right at the end of my high school career. He was a favorite of most kids. He was a fun guy. So it's kind of neat seeing that some of the people
What did he teach?
English. Yep. At least when he was with me, he taught English. So
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. It's just kind of neat to see that some of the people that started when you were there kind of ended up my career in high school. But what I appreciated about growing up in Britt, the teachers, I mean, I have no real recollections of having a bad teacher. Everybody cared about us as kids, and I'm sure you saw that as well when you were growing up. I'm a teacher currently teaching 4th grade, and it's like they're not going to remember all the specific lessons, but
Right.
you're going to remember how they made you feel and how they inspired you,
Exactly.
and made you want to be better.
I remember my 5th grade teacher. And unfortunately, I didn't have my mom, but I'm sorry, my 6th grade teacher. And it's too bad because the other teacher was not nearly as good as my mom was. One of the things that we were talking about, Dad and his style and so on. And, I really learned a lot from that I took on. And one story I'd like to share was when I was teaching at Clarion. There was a young man there that was an awesome athlete. He wasn't a very good student, but he was an awesome athlete. He had gone his junior year, he'd gone to state in wrestling. And he played football, and he wrestled 185 pounds. Well, if you wrestled 185 pounds during football, you were 210,
Yep.
right? Big, strong kid. He got stopped in, I can't remember whether it was Eagle Grove, where it was now, but he got stopped and he had been drinking. And at that time, the rules were pretty strict. The first time you missed 1 game. The second time you were out for the season. Well, there was one regular match left before they started the tournament. And the principal called me into the office, and he knew about this. And he was going to call Kent in and ask him about it. And if Kent denied it, then he would have to research it, and then he would not be able to wrestle in the tournament,
Yep.
in the sectional or district, whichever it was. And so it occurred to me that the principal was trying to get me to suggest to Kent that he be honest.
Yeah.
So I did that, and so he missed the last regular meet, but he went on to, I believe, semifinals in state. And one of the things that really tells me that how people can respond. I got on the wrong side of some kids because I busted them for smoking grass at school.
Mhm.
And left to go out, and I rode a touring motorcycle, and it was tipped over on the grass, and I couldn't get it up. And Kent and a friend came along. He said, "Mr. Everett, what happened?" And I said, "Blankety blank, somebody tipped my motorcycle over," and he helped me get it up. And Clarion was not a big school, and he looks at me. He says, "Mr. Everett, this will never happen again. You don't mess with Kent." So, and it all because, and there were a couple other situations that I tried to emulate what my dad might have done in the situation.
Yeah. Had a good example set for you to how to handle things. So your dad retired in 74. Did your mom also retire about then?
Yeah, they retired at the same time.
Okay.
And yeah,
where'd they end
and
up
they
from
lived,
there?
they continue to live in Britt for a while, but they go down to, they had, again, one of my dad's old friends from another school where he had retired into Arkansas. Well, they retired and they spent the whole winter traveling down to the south, came back up through Arkansas. Really liked this. It was basically a mobile home park on the White River. And so my dad bought a place across the street from his friend. And they came back up to Britt, and they come up to Britt in the summer and go down there in the wintertime. And did that for about 4 or 5 years. Then he said, "You know, the only reason I'm coming back up to Britt is to take care of the house."
Yeah.
So they sold it, and they spent the rest of their life in Bull Shoals, Arkansas.
And yeah, I saw that he passed away in 1996. Was it like August, September of 96, something like that?
I can't tell you the month. I believe 96 is correct. My mom died in 2003.
Okay.
I believe I'm saying that correctly.
Yep. Yep. Ballpark anyway. Yeah. Do you have any other fun stories or things that you recall from Britt growing up or playing football or other sports or things with your dad?
Well, you know, there's a lot of things that come to mind. You know, it's just I enjoyed it so much. And you know, as example, when Dad had to retire, again, first 6 or 7 games of the season, whatever it was before Christmas, I don't know if I started any games. I played a lot, but I don't think I started. And after Christmas, when Cliff took over, I think I started every game.
Yeah.
Didn't make that much difference, but that's just kind of the way, you know, the way my dad thought is, you know, that he's going to play, but I don't want people to think I'm playing favorites.
Yeah. The nepotism.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's commendable because I mean he had a great thing going, 5 straight conference titles and coach of the year. I mean, he easily could have kept going to see, how, the success, but it's commendable that he thought of you over possible
And
accolades or wins or whatever.
yeah, it really, and you don't realize that growing up.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't really know the whole story until well after I got out of the house.
Yeah.
And you look back at that, and I looked at what I observed, and like, for example, even though my dad was the strictest teacher in school, at Britt anyway, he never got in any trouble with any of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because it didn't make any difference if your dad was a doctor or if he was a mechanic at Ford or a farmer or whatever. It didn't make any difference. You treated the same. And he had learned. I remember he'd walk down the hall and he'd see Joe Cool leaning up against the wall with his arms crossed, and you know, the kind of student that most teachers would just as soon avoid. And he might go over and say, "Hey, Dan, how's it work? How's it going with that car you're working on? And they might chat for a minute or two, but he made a point of, because I saw him do it, of going out of his way sometimes to talk to kids, not just the athletes.
Yep. It's just amazing. Everything you're saying makes me go right back to Coach Sanger that we're all used to. It's just great people that cared about everybody is kind of the theme I'm getting from your dad, and it's just neat. As kind of one of the nerd historians for our school, I really want to find a way to honor your dad somehow, because 1955, 62, the 70s, that's a long time ago, and I want people to know about this guy. I think it's really neat that what he accomplished and the type of guy he was.
And, again, you don't always appreciate it growing up, but the older I got, the more I appreciated my mom and dad and realized how lucky I was, because something I haven't mentioned, but you probably already know, I was the youngest of 5 kids.
Yep.
And when my youngest sister was born, she was 6.5 years older than me. Mm-hmm. They named her Stephanie. So my dad's name was Stephen. They named her Stephanie because they didn't think mom was going to have any more kids.
Yep.
And then I came along, and you learn a lot, whether it's coaching, teaching, or being a parent, right? And as time goes on, you learn more what works and what doesn't. And so I had the advantage of my oldest sister when I was born was almost 13. And by the time I became old enough to know anything, my 2 older sisters were out of the house. Mm-hmm. And they had all kinds of experience, especially when you have 3 girls that are 2 years and 4 months apart, between the oldest and the number 3. You have to learn how to deal with kids. Yep. And so I was not rebellious, but I didn't have a lot of unnecessary rules. I didn't have to, 2 rules. If I tell you to do something, I want you to do it. If I tell you not to do something, I don't want you to do it.
Those are good rules. I like that.
Yeah, it's gonna keep it simple, and because he kept it simple, and I was not tempted by a lot of things anyway. I had my first drink as a sophomore in college. Mm. And we didn't have a real partying class anyway, especially compared to the one right behind us, class of 67. Yeah. But by the time we got to senior year, there would be this occasional kegger out in the farm. And so in a typical party, half to 2/3 of our class might be there. Mm-hmm. They did not invite me to any where there was drinking involved, because the kids respected my dad, and they didn't want to put me in a difficult position.
Yep, definitely.
So, it was interesting. You look back at some of these things.
Yep. I have a couple quick football related questions for you before we kind of wrap things up. In my research, the years prior to Coach Sanger, 2-point point after touchdowns was only 1 point, right? That's what I was gathering. You could kick it in as like a PAT, or you could go for it. Instead of getting 2, you just get 1. Was that how that worked?
I believe so. And that's why in the last game against Osage, they couldn't win the game. They could only tie it.
Yep. Because as I started getting from like 1967 and prior years, it kind of threw off my stats a little bit, because I was doing the scoring for the game, and I'm like, it kind of threw me off. So I was just wanted to clarify that. And then I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but your dad seemed like I saw some pictures of him, seemed like a very proper type of guy. What attire did he wear on the sidelines coaching football? Was he like the suit and tie type guy? Was that kind of the thing?
I can't visualize in my head, but that would not seem to be right. I mean, he might have.
Okay.
But especially like you look at today's standards, he would never have considered wearing jeans in school to teach class. That wouldn't happen.
So I won't tell you what I wore the last couple of days of school then.
Oh no. With holes in them?
Pretty informal. What's that?
With holes in the jeans?
Oh, no holes. No, I
Oh,
don't.
good.
That I
Thank
don't
you.
understand. But or my jeans with my polo.
I don't, I scratch my head and say, you're paying extra monies. Why don't you just get a pair of jeans and make them
Tear them
yourself?
up. Yep. I don't get it either. I have kids that wear jeans, but they might as well be wearing shorts because their legs are all showing anyway. So, yeah. So, as we wrap it up, I'm going to plug the Legacy Fund one more time and kind of talk about my next episode. And thank you again. And I had a lot of fun. I looked at my clock here, and we've been on this thing for almost an hour. It went fast. It was crazy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and send me a link to the Stanger Foundation. And also for all those people that are still listening at this point, this is the first podcast that I've ever been on, and I've never listened to one. So Dan's going to have to tell me exactly how I go do that.
yep,
Because
I'll get it.
I want to start listening to these. I think it will be interesting.
Yep.
Thank you
And
very much, Dan.
Yep, and I think it'll be fun because my next guest is Denny Brumm. He was a teacher
Oh,
at Britt
yeah.
when you were there. So yeah, like Steve was saying, the Sanger Legacy Fund was created to honor Coach Sanger and Mrs. Sanger. If you want to give to that, you can go to sangerstrong.com. I encourage anyone who has any ties to the Britt Kanawha communities to give. I'm on the board of directors for that, and we just had a meeting a couple weeks ago, and there's a lot of great things that are going to be happening with that in the near future. And then also for this podcast, if anyone wants to quote sponsor the podcast, all you need to do is send a donation to the Sanger Legacy Fund at sangerstrong.com through the Mankato Area Foundation. Let me know that you made a donation, and then in a couple weeks when I talk to Denny, I'll mention your name as a sponsor of the show to keep promoting the Legacy Fund. So like I said, Denny Brumm will be on next time. Denny was a longtime teacher and coach at Britt. He was the voice of Eagle football for 48 years as the PA announcer. He gave up announcing after the 2019 season. So he saw pretty much the entire Sanger era. Just a great guy. I can still hear his voice in my head when you'd make a tackle or make a play and he'd announce your name on the PA. It was just just a lot of good memories when I think of Denny. Also coming up after Denny, I'm going to talk to Bob Steenlage, the first ever 4-time state wrestling champion in Iowa history. Jim Diemer was the quarterback of the 1973 state title team. Coach Gene Perkins, Jim and Mark Timmerman are going to tag team one with me. And then Coach Sanger's second son, Rick, and also Don DeWaard from Kanawha. He was the defensive coordinator at Central College for 35 years. So Steve, thanks again for coming on. This was a lot of fun. Like I said, I was really excited to talk to you because I got to learn a lot about pre-Sanger years. And Kelly, I'll shout out Kelly Ekoff, your relative who kind of hooked me up with you. She was more than
I'm glad she reached out to me. I haven't seen her in quite some time. It's been, well, the last time I was in Britt was for the 50th class reunion. So what was that, 2016?
Okay. So I'm going to challenge you to either come back for a football game one of these years or go to when the games are on. KIOW.com is the Force City radio station. We live stream the games. My buddies Jay and Kevin do the announcing for the live stream and the radio. Like we were talking about how Britt, when you were in school, has great support for the teams. There are nights we're the smallest 11-man class in Iowa. 30 to 40 kids in a graduating class. There are nights where there can be anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 people watching the game on their computers or their TVs on the live stream. And there's oftentimes people from dozens of different states and even different countries watching the game, that people still follow their West Hancock football pretty close. So I challenge you, come to a game or watch a game and let me know. We can chat. I want to keep in touch. So yeah.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for coming on, Steve. We'll keep in touch and we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, man. Take care.